to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories, India's very own travel podcast, where each week we share the journey of travelers in their own words and relive their experiences with you, our listeners.
Hey guys, welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories in a brand new year and brought to you by your same old host, Saif Omar. Hope you're all well and had a wonderful end to 2022 and are looking forward to making some big travel plans in 2023. Let's hope that the new year brings us good health, success, and lots of travel. Before we kick off today's episode, a quick announcement of the winners of last episode's giveaway of Clyde de Souza's book Susegad, The Goan Art of Contentment. And the winners are Sudeep Maji, Sanand Dekane, Latishka Jagdio. Congratulations to the winners and thank you so much for listening and participating. We will reach out to you shortly with next steps. As for today's episode, we have a returning guest on the podcast, Utsav Mamoria, slow traveler and host of the podcast Postcards from Nowhere. Let's hop onto the episode and travel with Utsav to Kashmir as he shares some touching stories from this beautiful land. Some heartwarming and others heart-wrenching. Let's find out more. So with that introduction, we'd like to welcome back Utsav Mamoria, the host of Postcards from Nowhere, a very, very lovely podcast that I thoroughly enjoy. And so glad to have you back, Utsav. Welcome to the Musafir Stories again.
Thank you so much, Saif, and I'm so happy to be back. And thank you for such lovely words for postcards. It's something which has been with me for the last 3 years, and it is essentially a travel, culture, history, food podcast. And these are very short form stories, about 8 to 10 minutes, and we try to give you something unique, interesting, obscure, or fascinating about the world we live in. And that's what Postcards has been.
Yeah, and many, many congratulations, Utsav, on completing 150 episodes of Postcards as well. Like I said, one of the podcasts I enjoyed thoroughly, and I was just talking to Faiza while I was preparing for the episode and telling that I probably can spend a day trying to come up with a script that is as loaded and as impactful as Utsav's
Sir, you are too kind. I
I cannot. No, I really can't. I think the listeners should listen and judge for themselves. I truly would really struggle to come up with such meaningful episodes, and that too, the episodes that are 10 minutes. You can see that I'm just using up 10 minutes trying to explain this itself, so you see my struggles. But yeah, something I thoroughly enjoy, and many, many congratulations on the 150. And by the way, Utsav is also a behavioral researcher by training and a slow traveler by passion.
Yes, you remember the introduction of the podcast then.
Yeah, since Utsav is humble enough to not give that, I'm going to insert that in here as well. But yeah, we'll focus today again on your slow traveler side of your personality, Utsav, and try to learn a little bit more, and also for our listeners, give them a taste of Postcards. Where are you taking us to today, Utsav?
So this I'm going to take you to Kashmir. And I know the moment, when I say Kashmir, people are like, yeah, we all know there is Gulmarg, there is Sonmarg, there is Srinagar, there is Pahalgam, right? What else is there to see in Kashmir, and what is it that is not out there? But incidentally, I spent a month in in Kashmir. And when you spend a month in a place, you actually have the time and to see and discover a lot of things which you would have missed otherwise. Right. And I think that's where what's the beauty of slow traveling is, that if you have the privilege and you can design your life a little bit around it, the kind of things even the most boring and done to that destinations can give you is something fascinating. And I'm hoping that we go into some of those places and meander through some of those stories to discover what an amazingly beautiful place Kashmir is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, it's beautiful to the eye, right? And everybody is aware of that. But I was even more fascinated by some of the stories behind these places, right? Some of them,
Right.
like you said, even very little known. And given your style and given the time also you had, not a lot of people get to spend a time of a month in Kashmir, right? So, really, really looking forward to hearing those stories, Utsav. So, yeah, please take it away from here and tell us where we're going to start off the journey with and what are some of the beautiful stories that come along with us.
Yeah, I think we have to start off our journey in the iconic city of Srinagar, right? I completely understand why Srinagar has inspired so many writers, so many poets over centuries, because the city had so much to offer, right? Whether it is something as simple as walking the kadals, the bridges of Srinagar, and there are so many of those bridges which connect the city, or it is about actually experiencing Kashmiri delicacies, right? It's a city which has pretty much everything for everyone. And if you are a lover of history and culture like I am, there are these fascinating aspects of Kashmiri history and heritage which you can see in Srinagar. Like one of my favorite places to actually go was this place called Arq-e-gulab, right? So Arq-e-gulab is next to Khanaqah-e-Moula. That's of course a very very famous mosque, which is very much in the city of Srinagar. And Arq-e-gulab is a place which essentially makes rose water. Right now, the question is that one, who uses rose water anymore, and two, why are we talking about a rose water or a rose water maker? The fact is that Arq-e-gulab is the place which actually is, or rather houses, the last rosewater maker of Srinagar, right? And in all probability, it's amongst the very handful of people left in the entire country who might be making rosewater. And it's important to understand why rosewater is important, even though now we have perfumes and everything under the sun for fragrances. Rosewater itself, from a perspective of culture, is important in a lot of rituals and festivals at mosques, at dargahs, or even at graves, right? Where people come and pay their respects. And of course, synthetic rosewater is available today, right? It's easily available in the market. But the last rosewater maker of Srinagar still makes rosewater the traditional way, which means that he actually goes and gets roses. He puts them through an entire process where rosewater is extracted. And you won't believe how incredibly cheap that rosewater is. I think I got about half a liter of rosewater for about 20 rupees, right? And that's pretty much nothing, right? And the interesting bit is that if you look at the larger sense of when Islam came into Kashmir about 400, 500 years ago, right? And a lot of the culture of Kashmir, a lot of culture of what the Mughals got in as well in the later years actually comes from Central Asia and Persia, right? And Persia has a very very storied heritage of making rose water. They still have rose water and rose festivals in Iran. Oh, sorry, Iran is a of course the modern name for Persia, right? So
Right.
as Islam came into Kashmir, it also got in all these art forms, right? So one of course was making rose water, other was carpet weaving, right? And I think everyone who's in India knows how, or actually globally knows how amazing the carpets of Kashmir are, right? How intricately woven they are, and they're the reason they command, high price. And in fact, I actually managed to visit one of the workshops where local craftsmen were making carpets, and it's intense work, right? So these are still handmade. The way the designs are done is done in a language known as Talim, which has been designed by the by the craftsmen and the master designers themselves. And someone has to actually be trained to read that Talim and then be able to decide which threads go when, what is the thread count, and how many of them go together. Those are the kind of things which came with the religion, and sort of also became in many ways hallmark of what Kashmiri culture came to be. And we met the proprietor of one of those places. He also sort of lamented about the fact that more and more young people do not want to take up carpet weaving because it is extremely taxing. It's a very very hard job. It's also has occupational hazards, right? Of breathing too much of, but a lot of dust from cloths and fibers, which actually go into your lungs and cause long term damage. So there's actually a possibility that maybe not within your and my lifetime, but within a few decades, we might see something like rosewater making and Kashmiri carpet weaving actually, in the most traditional sense,
Yeah.
disappear from the thing. And I think that's extremely sad, because for a country like ours, which has so much of heritage and history and culture and craftsmanship and art, we are losing so much of it to time now,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, to me, that's what makes up culture, right? It's all intangible heritage like this, right? It's our arts, which actually, and rituals and religion, which actually brings out what our country and the mosaic that is. One of the things which I always recommend, if you are traveling, and if you can, please go and buy from these people. Please support these arts. It's very easy to for us to buy a factory manufactured T-shirt for about Gulmarg or Sonmarg, but by actually buying these articles. So I myself bought a kurta and a waistcoat. I can tell you the quality is amazing. Just the way you touch it and feel it, that's something which you're holding something of very high quality craftsmanship. So yeah, those two things really, really stand out for me, because it's just so beautiful and hardworking at the same time.
Yeah, and it's so sad also to hear that, right? When you say that, like in the next few decades, this might be lost. It kind of really hits you then, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, even now, I could tell you. Just by experience, right? When we were much younger, we would still see these Kashmiri carpet sellers, even in Bangalore, right? They would
Right.
come selling these carpets again. Even that tradition is like completely died down. You don't have such again, due to development, due to, like you said, industrialization and a lot of things being factory manufactured and stuff like that. Even that is slowly disappearing. So even we could feel it a little bit. Just you experiencing this at the source, that this is something that might be lost within the next 20, 30, 40 years. It's kind of really sad, right? And even going back to the rosewater maker, Arq-e-gulab, one of the first things you tie that to is the shrines and Sufi shrines, mosques, dargahs, etc. These places are where it's used heavily. And the Khanaqah-e-Moula, I think, right?
Yeah.
The shrine pretty much next to this.
Correct.
Even that is very, very unique, right? In terms of how it looks and how it appears,
Yeah.
and in terms of the architecture and everything. Utsav,
Yeah, absolutely.
we've been very used to like the traditional Islamic type of architecture. Even in most of the modern mosques you see around the country, I would say around different places as well, it's most of those Islamic influences. But here it's the Kashmiri wooden architecture type of thing that has the Buddhist influences as well, right? So you want to speak
Yes.
a little bit to that?
Yeah, in fact, that's very interesting, because I remember a few years ago I was in Uzbekistan, and I was completely blown over by the architecture of, whether I went to Samarkand or Khiva or any of those places, and the mosques, beautiful, right? But what is so interesting about Khanaqah-e-Moula, one is of course the wooden architecture, and we must also remember that while Islam came to Kashmir about 400, 500 years ago, Buddhism and Hinduism existed before that, right? So whatever we see as culture is never, something which we like to believe is pure. There will always
Yeah.
be influences, because it's the same people who were Hindus and Buddhists who converted to Islam, but they still carried their own art and craft practices into the new way of life, and that then of course got integrated into the way. So of course the mosque is known for wooden architecture, which is itself a rarity. But also, what's very interesting is that the walls of the mosque are covered with paper mache, right? And it's also an art form, I think, which is not mainstream, in the sense that yes, you will get stuff. So once in a while, you will go to these gift shops and you will get these paper mache pen stands and decorative stuff. But just to imagine an entire mosque from floor to ceiling actually being covered in paper mache is beautiful. And again, I recommend. And by the way, Khanaqah-e-Moula and Arq-e-gulab are right next to each other, pretty much. Like, it's like barely a minute walk away. So I would highly recommend going to both these places and experiencing and the compound of Khanaqah-e-Moula. It's so peaceful and quiet that you can just sit there. I remember sitting there for almost half an hour and doing nothing really, just seeing the pigeons fly away, kids playing, and the believers coming in and saying their prayers. And it was such a peaceful experience. And right outside it is, of course, the main road, and there is traffic. But the moment you come in, it's a different
Yeah.
world, and I really enjoyed that.
Wonderful, and thanks so much for shining some light on these. Obviously, like you mentioned at the beginning, too. Usually, Kashmir itineraries are maybe a week. Could stretch it a little bit to 2 weeks, and usually focused on the main points, right? Gulmarg, Sonmarg, Pahalgam, all of the important places. So, while you're in that kind of a rush, you often tend to miss out on places like these, right? The day-to-day, be your carpet weavers or your Arq-e-gulab or visit to a shrine. So,
Yeah.
shining light on places like that, as well as the stories behind them. Thank you so much, and we'll definitely make sure to link a wonderful series as well. Utsav has done on his podcast, Postcards from Nowhere. It's about a 10 episode series on
10, 12
Kashmir, right?
episodes, yeah.
Utsav?
The Kashmir Diaries,
Yeah.
it's called, yeah.
It's the Kashmir Diaries. We'll definitely make sure to link that in the show notes so you folks can give it a listen to. Wonderful. After spending some time at these places, right from the Arq-e-gulab to the last remaining carpet weavers of Kashmir or of Srinagar, where did you head off to next? What's up?
Yeah, so I was supposed to go to Pahalgam, but I had a day in between. And because I usually keep a few days, if I'm going between places, a couple of days, one day at least, a buffer, just in case I want to go back to a certain place. Completely by accident, I discovered this place called Burzahom archaeological site. Right now, of course, India is an ancient civilization, so finding archaeological sites everywhere is not new or is not unique. But there is a very unique connection it has with astronomy. This happened about okay, actually now almost 50 years ago, that there were scientists who were excavating the site, and they came across a scene in which there is a hunter, it's killing an animal, and there are these two very bright objects, and everyone thought, oh, this is just a scene from people who lived in the hundreds and thousands of years ago, who just painted a hunting scene, right? And it was completely forgotten and so on. What eventually happened is that it actually caught the eye of someone at Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Bombay, and they said that, hey, wait, two bright objects in the sky cannot, and so close to each other in the drawing, cannot be the sun and the moon, right? That's not possible astronomically. And the only conclusion they could really make was that it is a celestial event, and they thought it is the explosion of a supernova, right? A star which is, of course, in its final stages. And they looked back at records of when supernovas, were existing, and what were the recorded supernova explosions. And they realized that around 3600 BC, there was a supernova thing, and supernovas are extremely rare, right? So it is not like something happens. It's not like a Halley's comet, which comes every 75 years, which itself is rare because you at best will see it twice in your life, right? But
Yeah.
supernovas happened over hundreds and thousands of years. And in 3600 BC, there was a supernova event which happened, which could be visible from Burzahom. And that is when the scientists suddenly realized that the hunter and that animal is actually the constellation, and it's not a figurative thing. We all remember reading about the Orion constellation in school, right? So that hunter was actually Orion, and when they actually superimposed and understood what would have been the position of stars, they understood that this is actually the first ever recorded example of a supernova in a stone art form. And that blew my mind, because I was like, this is not something I was expecting to find in Kashmir, right?
Yeah.
A lot of things to love about Kashmir. Science was not one of them, and that was fantastic. So very fortunate again. I had that extra day I could go there, and after that we headed to Pahalgam.
Even
Again,
I
that
mean, this. Yeah, I'm sorry. Even before you head to Pahalgam, right? Even this. I think hats off to this was the Tata Institute of
fundamental research, TIFR.
Fundamental Research, TIFR. Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Hats off to them, right? Even like thinking in that direction and kind of drawing the connection that this is a real possibility, right? Because from that, I looked up, I don't know, from your links or wherever, that image as well that was drawn on these rocks, and it really looks like a hunting scene, right? Nobody would think.
Correct.
The only thing, right, you said, yeah, that stands out is, yes, the two celestial
Bright
objects.
objects.
They do, yeah, they look a little bit odd, but other than that, it looks like a hunting scene with a dog in the background, or something like a dog in the background, right? So tying that to actually this astronomy and the events tied to the supernova and everything, it's just mind-blowing. And also, again, a little bit saddening was the state of the place also, right?
Yes,
Burzahom,
yes.
given that beyond the astronomy, I mean, if you go back to some of the excavations that were found there, even these take you back to thousands of years, right? I don't know,
Right.
8, 9,000 years, how much ever that was. And you mentioned in your podcast that there was a T20 tournament going on in that
Yes,
ground
that broke
or
my
in that
heart.
space, right? Yeah. So it's kind of sad that sometimes it's referred to. I mean, some people also call this as a Stonehenge of India, right?
Yeah.
And look where or how Stonehenge has been preserved and how or what the state of this is, right? I think in one way, India is blessed with so many of these, be it from a historical perspective, archaeological perspective, whatever, right? So many of these great monuments and places that we tend to take them too lightly, and it's another specimen of that, right? It just kind of broke my heart that on one hand you do empathize with people who live there, that they do have like just regular people would have interests and things they do, but having that negatively impact such a significant site, and potentially that also has ties to a lot of events like this, the rock architecture, etc. That was also like really heart wrenching for me.
Yeah, and this thing is, it's extremely sad because yeah, I understand there's always a need for funds to maintain such places. It's just that to see someone actually do graffiti on those rocks, right, was just difficult. And but yeah, I mean, I'll just do a slight detour and say that since you have heritage from Bangalore as well, the rock at Lalbagh, right? The big rock at Lalbagh on which all of us climb has been dated to be 3 billion years old, which means it
Yeah,
existed before the dinosaurs, right?
yeah,
But it's large enough. We have built a temple over it. We have people play over it. It's large enough, so at least it's while it is not the ideal use of it, but at least it's in a space where it's not completely neglected. So there are ways to preserve things in different ways, and but yeah, I guess it's one of those things you have to hope that it changes.
yeah. Awareness, and I think just people being a little more aware about these things, and having that sense of conservation and preservation of your place, your land, right? I think that has to be
Yeah.
driven a little more deeply into people. So yeah, I'm sorry I interjected and cut you off, but you were heading to Pahalgam from here, you said.
Yes. So Pahalgam was actually the places where I probably spent the most amount of time. So the idea for my trip was I was still working, so I wasn't on leave all the time. I was remotely working from Pahalgam. And I wanted to go to a place which is a little away from the hustle and bustle of tourists and locals. Of course, Srinagar is a proper city, right? So it comes with all the trappings of a city in some ways. Wanted to go somewhere more relaxed, and we chose Pahalgam. And Pahalgam itself is also very interesting, right? So if you just ask anyone of Pahalgam or do a simple search, you will get Aru Valley and Betab Valley as the two top places to go in Pahalgam and do things. And by all means, I would highly recommend going to Aru Valley. I think it's beautiful. It's not a very strenuous hike, and I mean, if you can't hike for some reason, you can always use the animals if you're okay with that. But it's a beautiful place. It's a flat land, very lush green, and it is a thing of beauty. Betab Valley, however, is I believe very hyped. I think it's completely skippable. And let's face it, Betab Valley only became famous because Sunny Deol's film Betab was shot there, right?
जब हम यहाँ होंगे नहीं, जब हम जवां होंगे जाने
ये
कहाँ होंगे.
जाने कहाँ होंगे.
अब सनी देओल भी
So
बूढ़े हो गए.
हम बूढ़े हो गए हैं. But it had definitely put Betab Valley on the map.
Yeah.
And if you ask any of the locals, right, they would say that Betab Valley was nothing. Nobody cared for it. Yeah? It was just a grassland. So I would say that go to Aru, don't care for Betab. Everyone will try to sell you a package of saying, hey, do Aru and Betab together. I wouldn't even waste half a day at Betab. I think Aru is good enough and pretty enough for you to do. But there are two other interesting things of Pahalgam I definitely want to talk about. Is the number of hikes you can take from there, right? It's a great starting point for so many hikes and long treks as well. So there is, of course, you could go to Tulia Lake, which is a fairly 4 and 5 hours strenuous trek, and it's a beautiful place, right? Tulia Lake. Just look at the pictures; it's a gorgeous, gorgeous lake. You could, of course, go to a longer Kashmir Great Lakes trek and so on, and all these places. And Pahalgam is usually the starting point. I, on the other hand, thanks to my lack of fitness and not wanting to commit to a 5 day hike, I went to a day hike, right? So I went to Sheshnag, right? And Sheshnag is a hike which you can do in a day. It's about 4 or 5 hours. It's not very strenuous. It's okay. And we decided. So we were about 4 or 5 of us who decided to, do that hike. And we were essentially in August. This was August sometime, and we decided to go on that hike. One of the guest house where we were living at in Pahalgam, it was a long term stay. So he said, I'll join you guys and help you around with the hike. And we're like, great. And what we didn't realize to a very large extent was that how quickly the weather could change in some of these parts, right? And it's always true for the mountains, right? You don't know when the weather will change. It rained like crazy. One of the key bridges which connects two parts of the hike actually broke,
Oh.
right? So the question was that we were almost two-thirds into the hike. So do you take a different route, or do you, go back? And all along these hikes, you will see the shepherds, the Gujjar-Bakarwals, right? They are literally running off these slopes, right? Because they've grown up there, right? Their level of
Yeah.
comfort and intimate understanding of the landscape is very high, right? There's no way, we could do. And the moment we asked some of them that, hey, is there a different way we could take? They would show us a way which the sheep take, right? And if you have seen anywhere in the mountains, they're literally standing at 60, 70-degree inclines, right? And I'm like, this is defying gravity. I don't believe in gravity anymore, right? But we decided we will continue the hike, and we took another route, which in hindsight was not a good idea. The route that, because it had rained, the grass was extremely slippery. All of us were losing our hike, right? And if you lose your grip in a serious manner, you're essentially going to go down into the river straight up. It's at least a 150, 200 feet drop, right? So it could have been very, very dangerous. Somehow, thankfully, all of us made it. And we were about 15 minutes away from the summit. It started to pour, absolutely started to pour. And I, having been to the mountains so many times, I realized that I do not want to take my chances with nature, right? So I said, I am willing to wait here. There was a temporary settlement of a Gujjar-Bakarwal there. And I went down to his room and I spoke to him, if it's okay, I can wait. And of course, I mean, we're very, very hospitable people. The rest of my folks said that we want to go. I said, fine, I'll wait for you here. And within 5 minutes, they came back because it had become so slushy and slippery that they couldn't even do it. That Gujjar Bakarwal, a person actually saved our life, because he not only gave us shelter, but he gave us warm blankets. He made tea for us, right? And such is their code of hospitality that we were actually fought for 10 minutes for him to accept some money from us, because he is parting with precious resources, right? He doesn't have access to food whenever, and sometimes when they go up with the mountains, they might not return for 1 or 2 days. So again, amazingly saved by their hospitality. And of course, then the whole thing, became better. About 2, 3 hours later, the sun came out, and we told him about, is there an alternate route which you could take, which is not as risky, because the one which we took was just not working out. And he actually, with our guide, gave us an alternate route, which was about half an hour, 45 minutes longer, but very, very safe and very easy to hike. And again, I think never ever forget that the locals know the place the best. No matter how good and experienced a hiker you may be, you don't know that landscape, right? And it's important to have that humility to accept that there are massive limits to our understanding and knowledge of the world. And our guide was also very thankful to him, because our guide, while he's a local from Pahalgam, he's lived all his life in Pahalgam. He's like, this route even I do not know, and I have been to Sheshnag at least 10, 15 times in my life. So again, a great, great hike to go. Please do not be deterred by our misadventure. It's the entire hike is beautiful, right? So you will across places like Zojibal, beautiful spots, lakes, and there's so many of these, sheep grazing on the mountains. It's amazing. And you will suddenly find these huts made literally on the slope of the mountain, and there'll be only one hut in the entire mountain. And I used to wonder who lives there, but these are the shepherds, who live there or stay the night temporarily if they go to one of these long places, long hikes.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think it's great to hear your story or your misadventure, like you'd like to say. And I think that would also have been like a recurring theme, right? The people, the locals are actually known for their hospitality. Like even though they live in, even in terms of some of the terrains they live in, or
Yeah.
the situations they live in, right? It's pretty sometimes hand to mouth type of an existence, and they still are forthcoming to help out wherever needed. And you've done
Yes.
a wonderful series on the Gujjar-Bakarwal community as well,
Yes.
right? Just the background of the folks, their way of life, etc. You want to shed some light on that? What's up?
Yeah, so Gujjar-Bakarwals are a very interesting conundrum in the situation of Kashmir in India because they form about 12 to 13% of the population, right? But they're massively underrepresented at every level of power, government, or any sort of policy making, right? And one large part of it also is that, because they are constantly on the move, right? And then, of course, there is always a challenge of how the old way of living and the new way of living collides. A classic
Yeah.
example of it is the Dachigam National Park in near Pahalgam, which is known for the hangul, right? It's a very unique sort of reindeer which is endemic to Kashmir, right? So as long as it exists in Kashmir is when the species will exist. If if it dies out, the species is extinct. And a lot of the grazing routes of Gujjar Bakarwals, because they are shepherds, they actually come from, they actually pass through some parts of the national park, and that causes a conflict with the government and environmental conservationists, right? So it actually becomes a classic example of everyone has a valid point, right? The conservationists and the government have a valid point saying that if these species keep getting disturbed, they will never prosper, they will never multiply, and they will never repopulate. Whereas for what it means for these Gujar Bakarwals is that every time a particular grassland is off limits, they have to go up higher and higher, right?
Yeah.
And which is also risky for them as well as for their flock. And so this reminds me of my conversation with the man who helped us on the hike, and he said that do not forget that the prophet was also a shepherd, right? And he took a lot of pride in that to say that if I am carrying a legacy which is as rich as Prophet Muhammad's, there is no way I cannot not help you, right? It goes against my entire existence and ethos as a shepherd or as a Gujjar Bakarwal to say that I cannot do this. And they've also been shortchanged in many ways, because the entire narrative about Kashmir is India, Pakistan, Kashmiri Pandit, Kashmiri Muslim, in the the presence of the Indian army in Kashmir, cross-border terrorism, but no one talks about them, right? For example, these, by the virtue of the kind of work they do, they were actually India's first line of defense on cross-border terrorism. They are the ones who actually reported so much of insurgency or people illegally crossing into India's border from Pakistan. However, they have never been appreciated, for it, and so many of them who actually informed the Indian government were later hunted down, and actually killed. Right. So I think what also happens is that when you're able to slow down, and I'm sorry I'm belaboring this point, but there is so much about a place you understand because you believe that everything that is to be said about Kashmir is written, is already said, and if you go to Srinagar or even Pahalgam, you will see the military presence everywhere. In fact, we landed up in Srinagar on the third anniversary of the removal of Article 370. You could sense the tension in the city, right? There were parts of the city which had black flags, right? So it's a lot more complicated. And if you think of it, right, for an average Kashmiri who has been living his life trying to make a good living for himself or herself and their families, right, it's a lot of trauma they've gone through, right? It's intergenerational, right? And then so that is one aspect of it, but it's a story which it does get talked about. The Gujar Bakarwal story does not get talked about, right? They're not small by any means in the sense that they're 12%, so that's significant enough. And yeah, I think we also need to sort of look out for these human stories as we travel, because ultimately all travel is discovering either ourselves or the world, and it's an important part of what we do.
Yeah, and also like drives home the point that travel is beyond your glamorous and sexy Instagram shots, right? There's so many of
Absolutely.
these stories behind that are also deeply painful and bothersome, right? Like
Yeah.
representation, like you mentioned in this case, of a significant population and even their way of life. I think we did an episode on, it was a while ago, somebody who had actually hitchhiked around India on trucks. He kind of spoke a little bit about this too, right? How this overall concept of transhumance, where people basically the pastors and the
Right.
season and then during winters they move to a different place, etc. Even that way of living itself is now under pretty much it's going to end in the next few generations, right? Due to
Yeah.
development, due to obviously the borders and policies at the state level, at even, I mean, yeah, before nation states were there and borders were there, like these people literally they used to travel across what we call now as countries, right,
Correct.
as a part of their livelihoods, and all of that is gone. So sometimes, yeah, it's uncomfortable when you try to think deeply, but it is something that is essential, right? You have to think about these stories, these livelihoods, these lives, right? More than anything. Also, while you're traveling, it might not be very comfortable to do so, but these are all like true stories that need hearing and that need telling. So, thank you for sharing again a wonderful episode on this community as well that Utsav has done. And I'll make sure to link all of those together so you can probably do like a little playlist and give the series a listen. But yeah, moving on from the experience of the hike you did to Sheshnag, what was on the plan next beyond Aru, Betab, and then these other treks that you did in Pahalgam itself?
Yeah, so it was a very interesting thing, and again, completely stumbled upon it by chance. There is a Ganesh temple, right, in Pahalgam. It's a road which slightly goes up from the main market of Pahalgam, and Pahalgam is a very small place, right? So there is only one main market there, and there's an interesting story about that Ganesh temple, right? And if any of your listeners who grew up in India studying in CBSE, they would remember this from, I don't know if it is a Hindi poem or a Hindi chapter. This is a story about Shiva, Parvati, Ganesh, and Kartikeya, right? And the whole there was a bet between the two brothers. I don't remember the story exactly, but saying that it was a bet about circumnavigating the world, right? And Kartikeya said that I will beat Ganesh and I'll do it faster than him, because Ganesh is known as this, lovable, rotund god who enjoys eating his food, and who has his Vidushak, the mouse who takes him everywhere. Whereas Kartikeya is known as someone who is strong, who's well built, who's a warrior, and so on. And of course, Kartikeya, sets off. He circumnavigates the world, and Ganesha does not move. Both Shiva and Parvati are like, "You need to go, otherwise your brother is going to win." And he basically goes. He asks Ganesh and Parvati to stand in the center and goes around them, circumnavigating them, saying that my parents, Lord Shiva and Goddess Parvati, are the world to me, and if I have circumnavigated them, I've circumnavigated the world. They were very pleased with his response, and Kartikeya, of course, was not very happy when he came back, because he felt that he was cheated. But the interesting bit is that this temple where it's located is supposed to be the place where this entire thing happened. For the legends around this is that that is why the temple is dedicated to Ganesh, and you can actually circumnavigate around the temple. It's a very, very tiny temple. You barely will not have more than seven people at any point in time inside it. Right. And to me, there was just a very interesting connect from my childhood, because I remember reading the story, and in my head, it was like, oh, this must have happened in the heavens where the gods reside or something of that
Right.
sort. Right. But then you were like, oh, this actually happened on earth in a place I can go to. It was just fun, actually, more than anything. I mean, I did not spend more than maybe 30-35 minutes at that place, but it was just fun to go there.
Around
I
the world
also,
in 30
yeah,
minutes.
around more than 30 minutes. Oh, I was maybe faster than Ganesh also. I should not get ahead of myself and displease gods. So, but yeah, one more thing which I sort of missed out is speaking about when you travel from Srinagar to Pahalgam, right? It's about 50-60 kilometers, but it takes a little while because there are security checks along the way. When you cross, when you cross the town of Baramulla and Anantnag, most people don't know is that it is the bat factory of India and in some means of the world, because the quality of the Kashmiri willow is so good that it makes fantastic bats, right? And you can buy bats for a dirt cheap price. So for all the cricket enthusiasts listening to this, you have to stop and buy good quality cricket bats, because these are the bats, for example, have been used by Virendra Sehwag, right? Have been used by Sunil Gavaskar, some of the greatest Indian batsmen we have had. They use Kashmiri willow. And there's a huge controversy in the cricketing world saying that the good bats are only British willow, but that's all marketing, right? No one has found any reason to say that the Kashmiri willow is not as good as the British willow. And of course, you will also cross saffron fields, and easily probably the most expensive spice in the world. Depending the time you're going in, you could actually see some of them in bloom. It's a beautiful purple flower, and there is a stalk of that flower which is actually, what we call saffron. So yeah, if you have time, and there will be a lot of people selling saffron along the way. Pro tip: I don't think anybody knows how to buy saffron as a regular person, so you don't know what you're buying, right? We asked our driver. We are hoping our driver took us to a good place, which are actually good quality or authentic saffron. But well, I don't know any better. I like it in my biryani and my kheer, so I'm very happy buying it.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, the legendary Kashmiri willow and the bats, right? Very, very popular from the place. And one of the interesting thing, I also came across this Ganesha temple that you were mentioning about, right? I don't know if it's the same temple. Also, while I was looking up, I came across this temple called as Mamleshwar temple,
Yeah, that's a
apparently.
temple. Mamal temple,
That's a
correct.
temple?
Yes,
Mamal
that's a
temple,
temple.
right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, this also is tied to the story. I think when it is known that actually Shiva cut off Ganesha's head and replaced it with the
Oh,
elephant
elephant
head
head.
later, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
basically. At that time, obviously, Shiva didn't know that Ganesha's Parvati's son, and she had asked him to keep guard on the door while she was away, while she was inside bathing or something like that. And Shiva returned, like after a long time. Obviously, Ganesh didn't know who he was, and Shiva didn't know who he was, and he stopped him, right? He didn't let him go, and in his rage, he apparently cut his head. And then when Parvati told him about it, that's when he replaced it with head of a bull elephant, right? So
Yeah.
that legend is also tied to the same temple, and Mamal apparently means don't go. I don't know what language that is, but don't go, right? That's what he was saying when
Okay.
Shiva was trying to enter, and I found that also very interesting. That story, I mean, a lot of us would have come across the story, right, about Ganesh, and it was tied to this temple, and I found that too very fascinating. I just wanted to add that there.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
there's
had
so
no
many
idea this
stories.
was also linked
Yeah,
with Mamal temple. Thank you, Saif. I didn't know
yeah,
this.
apparently that's what it is. I mean, you said Ganesh temple, and I was trying to look up, and I found this story, and I was pleasantly surprised when you were mentioning about the story around circumnavigating the world between Ganesh and Kartikeya. There's a lot of these, and yeah, like you mentioned, it's always great to tie a place, right, to
Yeah,
the stories and the legends from either from the epics or from your curriculum, however you've heard them, right? It's always
yeah,
nice to tie them.
absolutely.
So, especially if you have the opportunity to kind of cover such places during your travels, make it a point too. But yeah, thanks so much for touching upon all of those. And away from here, this is still in and around Pahalgam. Where next to, Otsa?
Next to is a place which everyone listening to this, at least anyone who was, had any sense of consciousness in India in the early 2000s would know is Kargil, right? We all know the Kargil war. And there are two things about Kargil, right, which I definitely want to talk about. One, of course, is the war memorial, right? And I am not a person who considers himself to be very patriotic in the most literal sense, but I would highly recommend visiting the war memorial. With all the jingoism which we're going through as a nation right now, it takes important to go and actually see the number of people who lost their lives, saving their country and fighting for their country. And there are these memorials, about 600, 700 of them in there, and it gave me goosebumps, right? Just to even think of the kind of courage our soldiers have to even sacrifice their lives. And this was around the time the film was also coming out. I forget the name right now, which was Captain based on Captain Batra's life, right?
Sher Shah, I think, right?
Sher
Yeah,
Shah, right? Sher Shah,
yeah.
right? So there was a lot of promos going around, and then you actually go and read what Captain Batra had done. I mean, it's superhuman. It sounds completely superhuman, right? So it's on the way to Kargil. It's of course outside the village of Kargil, but I would highly recommend that take a stop, even if it's for half an hour. But please visit the place. You will be moved, if it might not change anything in your mind, but you'll definitely be moved by that place. And but the other place I was very interested in, which again is not so much on the tourist map, is a village called Hundarman, within near Kargil. It's about 10 kilometers from Kargil, and you can hire something from the main bazaar for a few hundred rupees to actually drive you to Hundarman. Now, what's interesting about Hundarman is that during the war in the mid 60s and the 70s, Hundarman actually used to be a village on the India Pakistan border. It actually used to be in Pakistan. And after the war, lands and places changed hand, and it came into India. And that's a very confusing thing because pre-partition it was part of the same country. Between wars, it has changed hands between India and Pakistan. And there is a museum of memories of people who fled overnight to the other side of the border and left everything. Right, everything means mundane stuff like utensils, clothes, to very personal stuff. Their pictures of their families, their driving licenses, their ration cards, and so on. And it's a museum which has been curated in the houses which have been abandoned. Right, and the place is called Hunderman, and the museum is called the Hunderman Museum of Memories. And the person who runs that museum, works with the Indian Army, and he has family on the other side of the border, to the point that and at one of the vantage points, when on the way, the army has installed a telescopic device in which you can see the bunkers on the Pakistani side, right? And just behind those bunkers are houses where relatives of people who live in Handarban live. And it's heartbreaking to imagine that, your own uncle, your aunt, maybe your cousin lives across the border. You are never going to get to see them. And they exchange letters, but imagine the painful process of being able to see their house just by eyeballing. And yet the letter has to first go to Delhi, it gets checked, and then it goes to Lahore or Islamabad, and then it actually ends up reaching the border in a 3 to 4 week process. And there is no guarantee that that letter is also going to reach.
Yeah.
And I think what happens is that when and I think I wanted to contrast it to the war memorial, because this is also an aspect of war which we often forget.
Yeah.
Right, in the larger narrative of nations, of people, of power, of land, we forget that there are people who live here, and their lives have been irreparably damaged, I would say, by
Yeah.
two countries, and there's a very famous African saying, which I like to quote. It's called, "When the elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers." Right, this is a classic example of how. And I love the way the person who runs the museum, and I did an episode around this as well, talks about his experience of the war, and he was quite young then, and how his family's on the other side, and how they've tried to preserve their memories in many ways, and memories of the others who left. And you suddenly realize when you walk through those artifacts, they are such everyday artifacts that you could imagine you using them yourself. Correct. And you suddenly realize the there is more common between us than there is difference between people, right? At the core of it, and I always think that it's essentially health, relationships, love, family, money. These are the things which everyone wants across the world, in different forms, in different ways, right? And when we strip ourselves down of our identities, of class, caste, religion, country, that's all we are really at the core of it. And I think that just makes it so clear when you go there. And it was a very moving experience for me personally, because I have grown an extreme amount of privilege, right? I have never had to suffer. And I think most of our listeners, I can say that both yours and mine can easily say that none of them have actually seen what it is to flee a war, or go through a partition, right? And there's a lot of interesting work coming out right now. Achal Malhotra and a couple of other authors are working on remnants from partition, and in memories of belonging. And I think those are kind of stories which also need to come out, right? So this is what fascinates me about Kashmir endlessly, right? There is a story at every step you take, right? If only you are willing to spend a little more time, right? If only you are willing to spend a little more energy and discover. Some of these are life-changing experiences. At least going to the Hunderman Museum was a life-changing experience for me, because it made the partition and the wars and the entire conflict very real and also very human. I think that's one of the memories which will stay with me for a very long time to come.
Yeah, and it's aptly called as the Museum of Memories, right? That's what it's
Yes.
called, Utsav?
Yes.
Yeah. The way you narrate them and just tie them beautifully to a lot of, like I said, right? At the bare bones level, like that's what a lot of us are about, right? Livelihoods, about good health, about your children growing up, education, healthcare. Like those are the things that we all care about, irrespective of what you are or what society makes of you, or what a religion makes of you, or what a country makes of you. That's all we are across the world, right? It's not even just within India. So things like
Absolutely.
that, beautifully messaging and trying. That's why I said I have no idea how you managed to pack these 10-minute episodes with so much messaging that Musafir Story probably doesn't have in its hour-long episodes either. So thank you so much. Really, that's the one aspect of the podcast that I really, really appreciate as well. But was there more you did in and around this area, or how was your itinerary looking at this point?
So at this point, we could go into Leh, but we decided against it because again, I like to keep my travel slow. I like to spend time, and I think it's important to reflect on what we experience rather than
Yeah.
just keep experiencing things. Because if you look at the way we create memories, right, one of the concepts in the creation of memory is something called associative memory, right? Memories can be evoked when certain associations are brought to the fore, right? For example, for someone, it could be frying samosas, which could be evocating a memory, right? That, oh, as a kid, I used to go to the halwai shop and get samosas on a Saturday or a Sunday for breakfast or something of that sort. So similarly, I think it's important to form associations with places you go, and only when you slow down, only when you reflect, you give time for those associations to form, right? And I can bet on this. Anyone who has done a 2 week Euro trip hitting 5 countries, 5 years later, they barely remember anything because it's all a blur, right? So we decided not to go. We did end up going into Ladakh. Like we drove to a monastery. It is called the Monastery of the Moon because there are these unique geographical structures around it, which makes you feel that you're on the moon, right? And it's a it's a beautiful monastery, right? And
I
of
think this should be
course,
Lamairo, right? If I'm not wrong.
Lama Yuru, correct,
Yeah, I
right?
think
Lama
we'd
Yuru,
covered this in one of
absolutely.
the other episodes. Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, again, a monastery which I really like going to, and of course, the landscape of on from Kargil to Ladakh is beautiful, right? It's just that very desolate, sort of not very in parts. Of course, it's very green. On the way, we passed Bayul, which was an invisible village, which also has a very interesting history. That the village is actually hidden behind the mountain, so invading armies used to completely miss that village when they used to invade kingdoms. And there have been times where the villagers have actually helped the local king by throwing large stones and rocks from the mountains because that no army was prepared to fight because they did not even know of this position, right? And again, it's also a great example of ecological tourism, and where they have also created a museum of their local heritage, right, of that village, and there are guest houses where you can stay, and I think it's a great way to experience local culture and give back to communities we are traveling in, because I think what we city dwellers often forget is that the importance of land for people, right? How much value people attach to land, right? To the place they live in and to the culture they grew up in. I think Seth, both you and I can comfortably say that we have moved around enough in the country and around the world to may not be had developed that strong feelings about a piece of land, right? But for locals, because they live off that land, right? They have memories of people of generations of that land, and it's important that if we are visiting those lands, the least we can do is ensuring that we are supporting the continuity of their memories and their culture as we go and experience it.
Absolutely. Again, a lot of us in the rush, in the rat race, we have even made travel almost like a rat race now, right? So,
Absolutely,
how many countries can I check off? How
it's a
many places
spectacle
can I
now.
check off?
It's no more an experience.
Yeah. How many reels can I do? How many stories can I do? How many pictures can I post? It's become a lot about that. But take a moment to just kind of soak it all in and take it slow, like Utsav said. And for some of us for who this might not be possible, there is always wonderful people like Utsav who are doing God's work in bringing these stories to us, sharing these experiences with us. I think you should write a book, Utsav. I know this is something I think that's already in the works, but
Yes.
I would love to get my hands on something that you put together. Just going by our conversations we have had about the podcast, even with aside from the podcast, as well as you're listening to your podcast, I would love to get my hands. What's the latest on that, Utsav? Is that still something that's
So
coming up soon?
it's coming up in 2023 for sure, right? How soon in 2023 can I get it out? I'm still not sure of it. But
Okay.
it's now a goal for me in 2023. I'm not no longer sitting on it as I have sat for 3-4 years. But
Okay.
yeah, now is you're definitely going to see the light of the day.
Wonderful. That also means I have to reserve another episode with you whenever the book is out. I mean, yeah, we could definitely do one before that also, but that's definitely some way we could plan and have you back to share some
Thank you,
more of
Seth.
this gyan, not in a demeaning or offensive way, but I would love to hear to this gyan that you share all day. Thank you so much, Utsav, again, just for showing us this very, very different aspect of travel, right? Not a lot of us usually take time enough to focus on these lesser known things, these stories, these, again, a lot of human touch to it, right? So you easily just bypass these for just the beautiful locales and things like that, but don't go underneath the surface to find out about the backstories, about the stories, the livelihoods, the people that are associated to this. So thank you so much for bringing this and many, many more aspects of travel through your beautiful podcast. Again, a quick plug for somebody who's listening to you or listening about the podcast for the first time, Utsav, that you'd like to give a shout out for?
Yeah. So those who are discovering it for the first time, I highly recommend checking out the series on Kashmir Diaries. But again, it's all about travel, culture, history, and food. Taken slow, we go deep into one sometimes very interesting, fascinating, and sometimes very esoteric and obscure topic. But I assure you, I hope to make it worth your time. So do tune in, please.
Yeah, definitely. Links will be in the show notes, so make sure to check them out. And thank you again, Utsav, from the bottom of my heart for being on the podcast and blessing the Musafir Stories with another appearance.
No,
Really
thank you
enjoyed.
for having me again on it, Seth. And always happy to chat with you and hope to see you soon in person.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much, Utsav.
Thank you.
That was yet another great episode on the Musafir Stories. Make sure to show us some love by sharing the podcast with your friends and family. We are on Instagram and Twitter at Musafir Stories. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM podcast app or the website. Follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram.